Welcome to Ask the Hard Questions, Season 1, Episode 6, Visionception. My name is Ananias. This episode is where the Sunday system's favorite escape hatch gets welded shut. Because if you strip away the worship fog, the slogans, and the "trust me, brother" tone, the foundation of Paul's authority comes down to this: a vision about a man who had a vision that confirmed the first man's vision, written down by a non-eyewitness, and then treated like it can override the king who spoke in daylight. That isn't discipleship. That's a closed loop, a smoke circle designed to survive without witnesses. Here's the question nobody on a platform once asked. Why does the apostle of the system require a private chain of visions to be believed when Yeshua demanded truth in the open? Why is the modern church trained to treat unverifiable experiences as deep while treating obedience as legalism? Why does the whole machine get angry the moment you demand the same standard God demanded from day one? 2 or 3 witnesses, consistent testimony, public truth, measurable fruit. This is what we're exposing today, a gospel that can't stand in court. A commission that keeps changing depending on which retelling you read. A story that survives only because the audience has been trained not to compare the record. Because once you compare it, you see it. A man sees a vision of Ananias. Then Ananias has a vision that matches it. Then Paul later falls into a trance and claims more private instructions. Then the details don't line up across the retellings. Then the eyewitness disappears from Paul's own letters like he never existed. Then the church calls it revelation and forbids cross-examination. So let me ask it the way the system hates. If your gospel is true, why does it need fog? If your authority is real, why does it need a locked room? If Yeshua is king, why do you keep replacing his public commands with someone else's private experiences? Why does the Jesus in these stories keep telling Paul to move away from Jerusalem, away from the very disciples who walked with him? Why does the Sunday system defend a vision chain with more passion than it defends the king's direct words? This episode is not about being clever. It's about being clean. Because Yeshua didn't build his kingdom on inner room whispers and desert road claims. He taught openly. He called for fruit. He warned you, straight up, that people would come claiming secret access, special revelation, and private authority. And the modern church learned to love it, because private authority is the easiest way to sell a gospel with no accountability. That's why we're doing Episode 6. Not to stir drama, to force a choice. The king or the circle? Witnesses in the light or visions behind a locked door? Obedience that can be measured, or experiences that can never be tested. If your faith can't survive questions, it's because it isn't built on truth. If it collapses under comparison, it was never the king's. Again, welcome to Ask the Hard Questions and Visionception. My name is Ananias.
Visionception, Paul's gospel dream machine, is a circle made of smoke. A man in a vision who sees a man in a vision who confirms the first man's vision, written down by a non-witness and then treated like it outranks the public words of the king. That isn't revelation. That's a locked room where truth is always inside the story and the witnesses God requires are always outside it. Break the circle and the fraud collapses instantly. Luke's own record says Paul saw in a vision a man named Ananias. The Greek term is horama, a mental spectacle, an inward apparition, not a public event you can put on the table as courtroom-grade fact. Then the plot tightens. Ananias had a vision too. So now your foundation is a dream confirming a dream, a vision inside a vision, a trance validating a trance. Where is the required external witness? Where are the 12 who actually walked with Yeshua? Where is James? Where is John? Where is Peter? Where is the Messiah standing in daylight before multiple witnesses the way he always did? Nowhere, because this system doesn't survive daylight. Acts 9:10-12. And when Paul finally reaches Jerusalem, he says he fell into a trance. The Greek term is ekstasis, being outside oneself. In that private state, a voice tells him to leave because they will not accept your testimony. So the shepherd who told his own to wait in Jerusalem now tells Paul to run from Jerusalem? The Messiah who confronted unbelief publicly now whispers privately, "Don't bother, they won't accept you." The king who gathered disciples by open teaching and measurable fruit suddenly endorses evasive maneuvers and unverifiable claims? That is not the Master of Nazareth speaking in character. That's a different voice wearing his name. Acts 22:17-18. Then the record fractures under its own weight. These aren't tiny differences. These are structural contradictions that should stop the entire machine. Who fell and who stood? Acts gives two different pictures of the same moment. In Acts 9:7, Paul's companions are described as standing there, speechless, stunned, frozen in place. But in Acts 26:14, Paul retells the event and says, "We all fell to the ground." Those are not the same scene. In a real investigation, you don't get to call that mystery. That's a contradiction. Either they stood or they fell. If the basic body position of the witnesses can't stay consistent, the story is already unstable. Acts 9:7 and Acts 26:14. Did they hear the voice, or did they not hear it? Again, Acts gives two different outcomes. In Acts 9:7, the companions are said to hear the voice, meaning they perceived something audible. But in Acts 22:9, Paul says the companions did not hear the voice of the one speaking to him, meaning they did not perceive the words, the message, the speech itself. The problem is obvious. This creates permanent fog. It keeps enough "something happened" to sound dramatic, while removing enough detail that nobody can test the claim. In court, this is how unreliable testimony works. It stays vague where verification would be required. Acts 9:7 and Acts 22:9. What did Jesus say, right then or later? In one account, the message on the road is minimal. It's basically, "Go into the city and you will be told what you must do." That's Acts 9:6. It means the instructions come later, from someone else, after the road event. But in Acts 26:16-18, Paul retells the story and suddenly the entire mission is delivered right there on the road, a full commission, a full assignment, and a full explanation. Those are two different versions of how the authority is given. Was it delayed and delivered later, or complete and delivered immediately? You can't have it both ways. Either the commission came later in the city, or it came fully formed on the road. Acts 9:6, Acts 26:16-18. And then there's the late detail that appears only in the final retelling. In Acts 26:14, Paul adds that the voice spoke in the Hebrew dialect. That detail is not emphasized earlier the same way. When key details show up only after multiple retellings, that's not proof. That's what editing looks like. Real testimony gets clearer by corroboration, not by conveniently upgraded details that appear when the story is being defended. Acts 26:14. Now watch what happens when the story needs a real witness who can be questioned. Ananias, the supposed restorer of sight and confirmer of Paul's calling, vanishes from every one of Paul's letters. Think about that. Decades of writing, countless arguments for authority, non-stop defense of my gospel, and not one mention of the man who laid hands on him and confirmed his mission. Not one, "Greet Ananias." Not one, "As Ananias can attest." Nothing. The character exists only inside Luke's narration. Single source eyewitness equals no witness. And then there's Titus, Paul's true child, fixer, and money carrier, who never appears in Acts.
Luke itemizes sailors, winds, street corners, and gates, but somehow drops the man who supposedly installs elders and carries major authority. That silence isn't innocent. It's editorial. The record is being curated, not transparently witnessed. Then Paul later describes Ananias as a devout man according to the law, with a good report among the Jews. Of course he is. The circle needs the shine of obedience to sell an apostle of exemptions. Borrow the halo, sell the loophole. Acts 22:12. And all of this runs straight into God's own standard. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every matter shall stand. Private trance is not a witness. A vision is not a witness. Trust me is not a witness. Deuteronomy 19:15. And the king himself refuses self-authentication. If I alone bear witness about myself, my testimony is not true. Yeshua demanded corroboration. The vision system demands exemption. John 5:31. And the Nazarene drags truth into daylight. I have spoken openly to the world. I have said nothing in secret. Compare that to a ministry built on dreams, trances, private commissions, and retellings that evolve over time. John 18:20. Now look at the timeline pressure. Acts narrates swift post-Damascus contact. Paul later insists he did not consult flesh and blood and withdrew before meeting any pillar. One story runs toward Jerusalem, the other runs away from it. One story seeks accountability, the other dodges it. Which Paul are churches selling today? Acts 9:19-30, Galatians 1:15-20. And when Paul does come to Jerusalem, Acts says they were afraid and did not believe he was a disciple. That's not instant acceptance. That's rejection. Then Barnabas gives a speech and Paul moves briefly, and then what? He's pushed out, sent away, back to Tarsus. Why? Because the system couldn't be stabilized under the scrutiny of those who actually knew the Master in the flesh. Acts 9:26-30. Now add the courtroom instinct that shows what kingdom he really leans on when threatened. He appeals to Roman power. He stands before courts and invokes imperial citizenship and appeals to Caesar. When the heat rises, the apostle to the nations runs under the empire's cloak. Zion or Caesar, watch who he chooses. Acts 25:10-12. And beneath it all, the engine keeps humming. Visions stacked on visions, visions and revelations, caught up to the third heaven, unutterable words. Exactly the private, untestable currency the Master warned would deceive, if possible, even the elect. If your gospel requires a dim room, a trance, and a trust me, it isn't the King's. 2 Corinthians 12:1-4, Matthew 24:24-27. Now set that against the Jerusalem decree and the fence line of holiness. The council draws a hard line against idol contamination. Paul's practice sketches gray paths around temples and market stalls, reclining in an idol's temple, managing consciences like a commodity, creating loophole logic around contamination. The council guards the flock, the vision man blurs the fence. Acts 15:28-29, 1 Corinthians 8:10-10-25-29. And heaven itself honors testing. You have tried those who say they are apostles and are not. Not, you celebrated their visions. Not, you honored their private revelations. Tried, tested, exposed. Heaven applauds congregations that reject unverified claims. Revelation 2:2. Now hold it all against the rock, against what Yeshua taught publicly, plainly, and measurably. Do not assume I came to abolish the law or the prophets.
Until heaven and earth pass, not one smallest stroke will pass. Whoever loosens even the least and teaches others to do the same will be called least. But whoever does and teaches, great. No visions needed. Obedience is public. Fruit is measurable. Righteousness is not a smoke show. Matthew 5:17-19. Many will say to me, Master, Master, and I will declare, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work lawlessness. Spectacle doesn't cancel lawlessness. Private revelations don't erase public rebellion. Matthew 7:21-23. If they say, Look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe. Translation: Beware the vision salesman. Matthew 24:23-25. As lightning flashes from east to west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Lightning doesn't whisper, it splits the sky. Matthew 24:27. So let's lay it out plain in real-world language, because this is exactly what your own instincts already know. If a man today said he saw a blinding light, wasn't sure if he was in the body or out of the body, told the story multiple ways and the details didn't match, sometimes witnesses heard, sometimes they didn't, sometimes everyone fell, sometimes they stood, what would you call it? You would call it unstable testimony. And then if a stranger from the next town said, It's all good, God told me he's legit, and then disappeared forever, leaving no trail, no fruit record, no public verification, would you rebuild your entire life on that? Would you throw out the direct public teaching of the king because a stranger vouched for a visionary? Yet that's exactly what the modern church does with Paul. They footnote Yeshua and headline the vision man. They domesticate commandments and amplify exemptions. They take the king who spoke openly and replace him with a story that can't survive cross-examination. Luke even admits he isn't an eyewitness. He writes what seemed good after tracing reports. Then he platforms a man whose authority depends on private trances and evolving retellings, and he never produces a breathing Ananias outside the page. And the Sunday system builds a sanctuary on that fog, market-tested grace, shortcuts around commandment, and a gospel that relaxes the least of the king's words. They preach freedom and sell indulgence. They preach grace and market lawlessness. They bless platforms while the poor are crushed under them. So choose, the king or the circle, Zion or Rome, witnesses in the light or visions behind a locked door, the lightning of the Son of Man or the smoke machine of a trance. Come out of Babylon. Keep the commandments of God and the faithfulness of Jesus, not faith in as a loophole, but the faithfulness he lived and the standard he will judge by. Revelation 14:12. The standard stands. The circle breaks here. Ask the hard questions. #EricSeeksTruth. Thank you for watching Ask the Hard Questions. If this episode hit a nerve, good. That nerve is where the spell lives. Visionception doesn't survive scrutiny. It survives silence. It survives when people are trained to clap for private claims and never demand witnesses. It survives when the church treats a vision chain like it has more authority than the king who spoke in public. Let me say it straight. A gospel that needs fog is not the king's gospel. A commission that changes in retellings is not a commission you stake eternity on. A system that panics when you compare the record is a system built on control. And here's the real fork in the road. Will you follow the Messiah who taught openly and demanded obedience? Or will you keep letting "I saw," "He told me," and "Trust me" replace the public words of Yeshua? Now hear this. I don't do this for money. I'm not selling you a miracle ticket. I'm not building a stage economy. I'm not trimming the truth so it stays friendly, marketable, and safe for the Sunday system. I'm not collecting applause from people who want a religion that costs nothing and proves nothing.
I'm doing this because lies are killing people, families, communities, entire generations, while the church hides behind fog, slogans, and revelations nobody can test. If you want entertainment, you've got endless channels. If you want truth, tested, compared, and pushed to the logical end, you're in the right place. Now do your part, because this is how the message moves. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Comment with the hardest question you've been afraid to ask. And follow me everywhere. Eric Osborne at EricSeeksTruth. Facebook, Messenger, Instagram, YouTube, and podcast. Share this with someone trapped in visions, prophetic words, and private authority. The king doesn't need a smoke machine. He needs obedience. Ask the hard questions. #EricSeeksTruth.